Trump destroyed as JD Vance drops shocking impeachment bombshell. In an absolutely stunning turn of events that has sent shockwaves rippling through the political establishment and left Washington insiders reeling in disbelief, Vice President JD Vance delivered what can only be described as a devastating blow to President Donald Trump during an unprecedented press conference held at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building on this crisp January morning. Standing before a packed room of journalists, cameras, and stunned administration officials, Vance methodically laid out a comprehensive case for impeachment that drew gasps from even the most seasoned political reporters in attendance. The vice president, who had been notably absent from public view for the past 72 hours, emerged with what sources are calling the most explosive cache of evidence ever presented against a sitting president, including detailed financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from over 40 witnesses within the administration itself. The bombshell revelations centered on allegations that President Trump had engaged in a systematic scheme to leverage his presidential authority for personal financial gain, allegedly directing federal contracts worth billions of dollars to shell companies controlled by members of his immediate family, while simultaneously pressuring the Department of Justice to halt ongoing investigations into these very same entities. Vance's presentation, which lasted nearly 3 hours and was broadcast live across every major network, included PowerPoint slides, authenticated documents, and even audio recordings that appeared to capture the president explicitly discussing these arrangements with foreign dignitaries and corporate executives. The vice president's voice trembled with emotion as he described what he characterized as a profound betrayal of the American people's trust, stating that his conscience would not allow him to remain silent any longer in the face of what he termed the most egregious violations of the presidential oath he had ever witnessed. Congressional leaders from both parties sat in stunned silence as Vance methodically dismantled the administration's previous denials, point by point, revealing that he had been secretly cooperating with federal investigators for the past 8 months and had authorized the FBI to monitor his own communications with the president to build an ironclad case. The vice president revealed that the alleged scheme involved at least 17 foreign governments, 32 major corporations, and a labyrinthine network of offshore accounts that had been specifically designed to obscure the flow of money from government contractors back to Trump family interests. According to the documents Vance presented, the total amount allegedly misappropriated could exceed $12 billion, making it potentially the largest corruption scandal in American history, dwarfing Watergate, Teapot Dome, and every other presidential scandal combined. Vance disclosed that he had made the agonizing decision to come forward after discovering that the president had allegedly ordered the Department of Defense to alter bidding processes for major weapons systems contracts to favor companies that had made substantial payments to Trump-controlled entities, potentially compromising national security in pursuit of personal profit. The vice president's presentation included testimony from career civil servants who described being threatened with termination if they refused to participate in what they characterized as illegal schemes, and several individuals broke down in tears as Vance played video depositions in which they recounted the immense pressure they faced to compromise their professional integrity. In perhaps the most dramatic moment of the press conference, Vance revealed that he had personally recorded dozens of conversations with President Trump over the past 6 months, after becoming suspicious of the president's instructions regarding federal contracts and appointments, and he played several of these recordings for the assembled journalists, in which Trump's voice could clearly be heard discussing percentages, payment schedules, and the need to keep certain arrangements completely off the books and away from those idiots in Congress. The vice president explained that he had initially hoped to address these concerns privately within the administration, but that his attempts to raise questions had been met with hostility, threats, and ultimately an attempt to force his resignation, which he refused to tender. Vance stated that he had consulted with constitutional scholars, former attorneys general from both parties, and even reached out to living former presidents to seek guidance on how to handle this unprecedented situation, and that all of them had encouraged him to bring this information to light regardless of the personal and political consequences. The vice president acknowledged that his decision would likely end his political career and subject him to vicious attacks from Trump's supporters, but he maintained that some principles transcend partisan loyalty and personal ambition, and that the Constitution must be defended even when doing so requires immense personal sacrifice. The immediate fallout from Vance's revelations has been nothing short of catastrophic for the Trump presidency, with political alliances that seemed unshakable just hours ago now fracturing in real time as lawmakers scramble to distance themselves from the administration and position themselves for what many are predicting will be the most consequential impeachment proceedings in American history. Within minutes of the press conference concluding, House Speaker announced that the House of Representatives would convene emergency hearings beginning immediately, with articles of impeachment expected to be drafted within 48 hours, and even stalwart Trump allies who had previously defended the president through numerous controversies were issuing carefully worded statements expressing deep concern and calling for a thorough and transparent investigation into the vice president's allegations. Senate Majority Leader indicated that the Senate would be prepared to conduct an impeachment trial on an expedited basis, and notably refused to rule out the possibility of voting to convict if the evidence supported the charges, a remarkable departure from his previous unwavering support for the president. Legal experts appearing on cable news programs throughout the afternoon uniformly characterized Vance's evidence as devastating, overwhelming, and potentially criminal, with several former federal prosecutors stating that the recordings alone would likely be sufficient to support not only impeachment, but also criminal indictments on charges ranging from bribery and honest services fraud to conspiracy and potentially even violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The stock market reacted with predictable volatility, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunging more than 1,400 points in afternoon, trading as investors grappled with the unprecedented political uncertainty, and the dollar weakened significantly against other major currencies as international markets digested the implications of potential American political instability. The White House initially remained silent for nearly 2 hours after Vance's press conference concluded, with scheduled events being abruptly canceled and staff members reportedly in a state of near panic as they attempted to formulate a response to allegations that struck at the very heart of the administration's legitimacy. When press secretary finally appeared before reporters, she offered only a terse written statement denying all allegations and characterizing Vance's presentation as a politically motivated betrayal orchestrated by unnamed enemies of the president. But she refused to take questions and quickly retreated from the podium amid shouted inquiries about specific documents and recordings that Vance had presented. President Trump himself broke his silence via social media approximately 3 hours after the press conference, posting a series of increasingly inflammatory messages in which he characterized Vance as a backstabbing rhino and a total lightweight who had been used by the deep state to undermine his presidency, and he claimed that all of the allegations were completely fabricated and that he had never done anything wrong in his entire life. The president's posts grew more erratic as the evening progressed, with Trump asserting that he was the victim of the greatest witch hunt in history and that Vance's evidence had been created by corrupt FBI agents who were working with radical Democrats to overturn the results of the election, though he offered no specific rebuttal to any of the documents or recordings that had been presented. Trump's legal team released a statement promising to vigorously defend the president against what they termed baseless accusations. But several attorneys who had previously represented Trump in various legal matters privately told reporters that the evidence appeared far more substantial than anything they had encountered in previous investigations, and at least 2 prominent lawyers announced they would not be participating in the president's defense going forward. Congressional Republicans found themselves in an extraordinarily difficult position, torn between their traditional loyalty to a president from their own party and the overwhelming evidence that had been presented by the vice president, himself a Republican, with impeccable conservative credentials who had been Trump's own choice for the position. Several prominent Republican senators, who had previously been considered Trump loyalists, held an emergency meeting late in the afternoon, and sources familiar with the discussion reported that there was serious consideration being given to privately encouraging the president to resign rather than face an impeachment trial that could permanently damage the party's standing with moderate voters. Former Trump administration officials began emerging from the woodwork, with several cabinet members who had previously resigned under contentious circumstances now suggesting that they had witnessed concerning behavior during their tenure, but had felt unable to speak out at the time, and their willingness to potentially testify before Congress added yet another layer of complexity to an already explosive situation. International reactions poured in throughout the day, with allied governments expressing concern about American political stability, while carefully avoiding direct criticism of the president. And several foreign ministers issued statements emphasizing their country's commitment to working with the American people and their democratic institutions, regardless of who occupies the Oval Office. Perhaps most significantly, early polling conducted in the hours after Vance's press conference suggested that public opinion was shifting dramatically, with even a substantial percentage of Trump's own supporters indicating that if the vice president's evidence was authentic, they would support impeachment and removal from office, representing a stunning reversal for a president who had maintained remarkably stable support among his base through numerous previous controversies. Constitutional scholars debated the unique aspects of an impeachment initiated by evidence from the vice president himself, with some arguing that Vance's willingness to testify against the president who selected him added enormous credibility to the allegations, while others worried about the precedent of a vice president effectively seeking to overturn the results of an election, though most acknowledged that if criminal conduct had truly occurred, the vice president had not only a right but submits, arguably a duty to bring it to light. As night fell over Washington, the political world remained in a state of suspended animation, with lawmakers, legal experts, and citizens alike trying to process the implications of a scandal that seemed to grow more severe with each passing hour, and speculation ran rampant about whether Trump would attempt to fire or somehow neutralize Vance, whether additional evidence would emerge, whether criminal charges might be filed even before impeachment proceedings concluded, and ultimately whether the American constitutional system would prove resilient enough to handle a crisis that seemed to test the very foundations of democratic governance and the rule of law in ways that few could have imagined even in an era that had already witnessed unprecedented political turbulence and constitutional stress.